Welcome to the Becoming Muslim podcast. Today's guest is Mamoon Yusaf. He is well known for his UK TV show called The Quran Coach and for his book, Inside the Soul of Islam, a unique view into the love, beauty and wisdom of Islam for spiritual seekers of all faiths. He is a trainer, a speaker and a coach. In this episode, Mamoon teaches us the 3 reasons why you should become a Muslim. Number 1, the first reason you should become a Muslim is the media. Mamoon talks about the biggest dangers of the mainstream media and how to beat your fear of Islam. He explains the 3 signs that you are a victim of fear-mongering. Learn the truth behind what the media is not telling you about Islam. Learn how the media will give you the world's worst advice about Islam. Number 2, the second reason you should become a Muslim is God, or Allah. How secure is your belief in God, and are you an atheist? Mamoon gives us a quick way to understand the proof of the existence of God so you can safely learn the first essential teaching of Islam. Number 3, the third reason you should become a Muslim is spirituality. Mamoon explains what is unique about Islamic spirituality. He shares the spiritual do's and don'ts so we can gain spiritual evolution. He tells us 3 good ways to remove spiritual confusion and 3 reasons why it is better to try Islamic spirituality. He also explains why Islamic spirituality is better than all other types and how you will experience a paradigm shift and an inside-out transformation through it. Welcome to the show, Mamoon.
Thank you so much for having me. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you too. Okay, Mamoon. So I mentioned, everything that you got going in the introduction there. So just before we start, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
Great question. The best way to get in contact is if you go to quranforbusypeople.com and sign up to the mailing list, and then you can actually reply to any email I ever send you, or you can just send an email to mamoon@quranforbusypeople.com. That's the best way.
Okay, Mamoon, so tell us a bit about yourself.
So, what would you like to know? I have been coaching people for the last, over a decade now, using this understanding of psychology called the inside-out paradigm, and the results that I help people get. I work with people from a lot of different backgrounds, but when I'm working with Muslims, it's usually focused on helping them achieve kind of Muslim-specific things, like achieving their Quran goals or being productive from Fajr. And relationship advice is a really, really big one in the Muslim community as well. And I guess the thing I'm probably most well known for at this point is either the TV show. I have a TV show on British Muslim TV called The Quran Coach, and also the book. So I published a book a couple of years back called Inside the Soul of Islam.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people that I talk to mention you, and I checked out your YouTube channel, and there was a few, maybe 5 or 10 videos about testimonials, and all of them seem to be from people who were not Muslim.
Yeah, I've worked with people from all different backgrounds, of course. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I do. Ultimately, as a coach, I just want to help people get whatever results they want. So when I'm working with Muslims, people in the Muslim community, it's tends to be a lot of dating and relationship advice and things related to those goals. And in the mainstream, it's oftentimes it's business building. Also, probably the crossover is a lot of relationship advice as well. So, but I'm just kind of an open book. I know what I know, and I'm accessible. And if people, it's to me, the purpose of life is a deeper understanding of the self and thereby a deeper understanding of the divine. And that's absolutely universal. People from all different backgrounds want that. And it shows up in different ways for different people. Some people are they're feeling insecure because their business isn't growing the way they want it to. Other people are feeling insecure because of their love life. But ultimately, having a deeper understanding of who you truly are and the spiritual nature of who you are leads to huge insights and realizations that impact all areas of your life.
Okay, yeah, so most of our listeners out there, our audience out there, are going to be people who are not Muslim, but they're thinking about becoming Muslim. They're researching about it, or maybe they've been thinking about it for a long time. So today, I want to use you as a tool to give advice to this sort of person.
Sure. Well, here I am. Use me any way you want. Actually, for that particular audience, I wrote a book that was really written for a mainstream audience, and it was originally published by Hay House, which is a big personal development and spiritual growth publisher in the mainstream. And that's the book called Inside the Soul of Islam. And in a way, kind of everything I have to say to somebody who's into spiritual growth and is into personal development and is open to exploring Islam as well as an avenue for that, everything I really have to say about that is kind of already in that book. So I would, and a lot of people read it and are from many different backgrounds in it. It's certainly, I've received feedback that it's definitely changed people's perspectives on the religion. And I think something kind of interesting is a lot of other major world religions have really popular mainstream books about the spiritual gems inside of that religion that are accessible to a mainstream audience, right? Particularly, of course, Buddhism comes to mind, Zen Buddhism in particular. There are books by the Dalai Lama, by Thich Nhat Hanh, these spiritual masters, right? And it occurred to me that there is a lot, like an almost infinite amount of spiritual juice inside of Islam, that if it's explained properly, anybody can access it. And I think one of the things that some of the audience might have found here is that if you, Muslims oftentimes can be very passionate and enthusiastic about their religion. And when asked, well, what's so amazing about it? What's like, tell me how it's changed your life so much. They're like, well, basically you become Muslim and then you start praying. And then at some point in the middle of the night, while you're praying after a long day of fasting, maybe you just have this really deep spiritual connection with God. And oftentimes it's hard to explain beyond that. And the problem is that really what that's doing is it's putting up a few barriers between the average person who's not Muslim and having those deep spiritual connection and understanding, because it's kind of like, well, yeah, you have to be Muslim, you have to pray, you have to learn how to pray, you have to learn how to wash, you have to learn how to fast, and then you do all these things, and then maybe you'll get some of the spiritual juice. And oftentimes the best spiritual teachings in Islam are kind of a little bit hidden, and maybe even made a little bit mysterious because they're hidden behind a language barrier and hidden behind kind of a layer of kind of Arabic words that are very meaningful to a Muslim audience, but a non-Muslim audience won't know what they mean, or, you know. So basically the aim of the book was just to cut through all of that and see if I can give the reader some of the spiritual juice that Muslims bathe in and drink. It's kind of the reason the book is called Inside the Soul of Islam is because I really wanted to give people an insider's view of the spiritual depth of Islam. And one of the ways, well, there's a few ways of doing that, but one of them is just sharing all of these deep spiritual values and teachings in a way that you don't have to know Arabic and you don't have to have an understanding of the religion before you can start accessing the juicy stuff.
Okay, thanks for that, Mamoon. So I looked up the book on Amazon.com and I looked at the description there. And so I'm going to quote something from the description. I'm not sure if it's written by you,
Sure.
Probably not, but there's 3 sections to it. So I'll go through the first section. It says, Islam is the title, Inside the Soul of Islam, a unique view into the love, beauty, and wisdom of Islam for spiritual seekers of all faiths. Okay, and then the first section says, Islam is currently the most spoken about religion in the Western world, and yet it is also the most misunderstood and misinterpreted. Despite frequent news coverage, we remain poorly informed about the true beliefs at the heart of Islam. How many of us would be able to explain who the Prophet Muhammad was or what the Quran actually teaches? So there's a lot in there. So can we try and dissect a little bit of that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So it's the first part. It says it's the most spoken about religion in the Western world.
Yes.
Yet it is misunderstood and misinterpreted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what does your book say about that?
Great question. So why is it the most spoken about and yet the most misunderstood? This seems like a contradiction in terms almost, right? Like people speak about it a lot, but it's misunderstood. It's kind of interesting. It's obviously the most spoken about because of, acts of terrorism make their way onto mainstream media, and there are people who call themselves Muslims and are committing the worst atrocities, like the biggest sins in the religion of Islam. They're doing them, but they're saying, I'm doing it because I'm Muslim. Yay. like Allahu Akbar. And then they go and do the biggest sins, right? Like killing innocent people and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of, when I first sat with the publishers, the people who ultimately published the first edition of the book, I sat with them and I said, look, if you really just want to make money out of a book about Islam, the easiest, fastest way to do that would be for me to say, hey, I'm an insider. I've been a practicing Muslim for the last 20 years, since 9/11, even before that. And I know this religion better than most. And I got to tell you, this religion, Islam, it's even worse than you think. It's even more dark. There's even more horrible things in it. And the publishers, the kind of managing director at the time of that company said, well, you know what, Mamoon? We would never publish that kind of book. And I said, good, because I would never write that kind of a book. What you're going to get from me is the truth about what the religion actually teaches. There aren't almost 1.8 billion people in the world walking around trying to follow a religion that teaches you to do evil. And it's literally the understanding that's put forward by some mainstream commentators is exactly wrong. It is 100% incorrect. It's actually 180 degrees the opposite of the truth. Because really what they're trying to say is, they're trying to say that the religion of Islam teaches that if you do evil, you'll go to heaven. And if you do good, you'll go to hell. Which is, of course, the exact opposite of the truth. Islam is very clear about heaven and hell, but it's like you do as much good as you possibly can while you're alive to all those around you. And with the abundant mercy and love and forgiveness of God, you'll go to heaven. And you avoid evil as much as you possibly can and stop it whenever you can, first and foremost in your own soul and with your own tongue, and holding yourself back from any negative evil impulses. And that will lead you, that will prevent you from going to hell, right? And it's also extremely clear, like if you give in to every negative evil impulse you have, there's no questions that in the Quran it's very blatant and clear about the existence of hell and heaven, right? So why do I say that? Well, there are people who claim that, Muslims believe that you've got to kill them wherever you find them. Completely butchered, horrendously misquoted, misinterpreted verse of the Quran, which is actually in a context where the Muslims at the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, were trying to go to Medina to do the pilgrimage. But when you do the pilgrimage, you normally don't have weapons with you. But there were a tribe of people in Mecca at the time who wanted to kill all of the Muslims. So the question was raised, well, are we allowed to, if they fight us, are we allowed to defend ourselves? And then the verse was revealed. But I'll give you a little nugget for everyone who's not Muslim, who's exploring Islam, because the thing is, it can be very confusing, because if you just Google these things, you'll always get confused, right? If you Google these things, because the first few pages of Google are going to be run by people who have agendas, like real political agendas. But a real simple antidote here is to do this. If you actually read the Quran from the beginning to the end, you won't get confused. It's very clear and very clarifying. And what you'll notice happens when people who have, like the people who want to convince the public that Islam is an evil religion and we need a kind of anti-Muslim a campaign and that kind of thing, what they do is they say that they've read the Quran, but they'll only ever quote about maybe 5 verses. And these 5 verses are all misquotes, right? What do I say? Misquotes? They're like, no, I'm saying it verbatim. Well, no, you're not. Firstly, you're using an English translation, usually a really bad one. And secondly, you're not sharing the verse before and after, right? Because they kill them wherever you find them verse. If you go to the verse before, if they don't fight you, then don't fight them. If they cease, then don't persist with it. Like, in context, it's never an issue, right? But they'll quote about 5 verses. And if anyone quotes to me one of those 5 verses, I know they probably haven't actually read the Quran, because if you were to read it cover to cover, those verses wouldn't have stood out. The reason they stand out is when you look at them without all of the rest of the Quran, right? They say that the best exegesis of the Quran is the Quran itself. Now, I was on, I think it was Sky News a couple of years back after some terrorist attack, and they were interviewing me, and the interviewer said, well, isn't the problem, Mamoon, isn't it the problem tasfir, but he meant tafsir, right? Which is exegesis of the Quran, how you explain the Quran. As if there are all of these different interpretations of Islam, and because there are these different interpretations of the Quran, people are taking the bad interpretations, and it almost like they're innocently misinterpreting the Quran, and that's leading them to do acts of evil. And that could not be further from the truth. The problem isn't people innocently misinterpreting the Quran. The problem is people willfully disobeying it. Because if you obey the Quran, it is impossible that you could ever think you could kill an innocent person. That's just willfully disobeying it. If anything, you would think, I have to do as much good as I possibly can to everyone around me as fast as I can before I die, right? Before my time comes. That's the essence of the message. Amanu wa amilu salih. Believe in God, or just believe and do good. Believe and do good deeds. Believe and do good deeds. This is repeated hundreds of times throughout the Quran. So yeah, the most widely spoken about, absolutely, it gets a lot of news coverage, and the most misinterpreted, because oftentimes the people who are brought onto television as the so-called experts on Islam, honestly, they couldn't tell you what the first page of the Quran says. This is one of the points I make in the book, in in one of the first chapters about love, right? It's like, they won't be able to tell you what the first page of the Quran says. Why is this important? Well, because the first page of the Quran summarizes the entire message of the Quran. That's the first reason this is important. The second reason it's important is that the first page of the Quran has a subtle condemnation of people who do acts of terror, right? You'd need to understand the last couple of verses to know what I mean by that. But if you read the first page of the Quran carefully with a good translation, you're like, oh, this is actually a subtle diss to people who are who incur anger, who are overcome with anger and then act out on that. The third reason it's important is the first page of the Quran is the page that pretty much every Muslim in the world knows off by heart. And then you've got a so-called expert on Islam coming on TV saying it's an evil religion. But if you were to really ask that person, hey, what does the first page say? They would probably draw a blank. They certainly couldn't, they might, well, yeah, it would be hard for them to say, right? But what they will say is, oh, but what does chapter so-and-so, verse so-and-so say? Like, yeah, what does chapter 1, verse 1 say? I'll tell you what it says. It says, in the name of God, the most loving, the most benevolent. And that's the starting point of our exploration of Islam. Another way I say it is like this. Look, you will never gain guidance by studying misguidance. You'll never see the light if you are immersed in darkness. You'll never have a sound interpretation if all you're doing is reading false interpretations. And you'll never understand the love and beauty and depth of Islam if all you're watching are news reports about terrorism. This is a very useful frame to use for people who will try pulling out the odd verse here and there. And the Quran puts it very nicely somewhere at the beginning of the Surah Al Imran, which is the 3rd chapter. So you can read the first couple of pages, but there's a beautiful verse in there that says that those whose hearts are diseased, that there are certain verses that are crystal clear and there are certain verses that are ambiguous. Those whose hearts are diseased will try to share the ambiguities with their own made-up interpretation, but they don't know what they're talking about. And those who are firmly grounded in knowledge, say, we believe in the book, all of it. And there is a secret in that verse because it resolves this whole problem of, the problem of the accusations made against the Quran and against Islam, which is this. If there is a verse, like, look, if I was to say to, like, I don't know, like Sam Harris or whatever, like, we don't need to mention the names of all the people, but some of the people are really full on, like, have anti-Muslim viewpoints, right? If we were to say to them, okay, explain to me how Islam works, right? Do you think that I'm meant to go around and kill my neighbors? Well, yeah, that's what your religion teaches, right? But it's like, so if I'm meant to go, if you think that the Quran is telling me to kill them wherever you find them, go around and kill your neighbors and things like that, how do you explain that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, love your neighbor? And he said that the Archangel Gabriel came to me, reminding me to do good to my neighbor so much that I thought that he would tell me to make my neighbor the heir to my inheritance. Like, so many reminders from the Archangel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad to do good to your neighbors. The believer cannot sleep while their neighbor is hungry. Right? And why do I use the term neighbor? Obviously, there are other hadith, other prophetic sayings, and other Quran verses with different words. Sometimes your brother, wish for your brother what you wish for yourself. And some people can try and misinterpret that to say, well, it just means some people might say it just means your familial brother, or it just means your brother in faith. Actually, it means your brother in humanity. How do we know that? Because of all these other sayings, the best of people are those who bring the most benefit to the rest of people, right? All these things together bring us to the conclusion it's talking about all of humanity. And when you talk about your neighbor, whether you were in Mecca or Medina at the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, your neighbor could have been of any religion, any background, any persuasion, right? Your neighbor could have been Muslim, but it also could have been Jewish, could have been Christian, could have been a polytheist, could have been an absolute atheist, right? This was all perfectly possible in Mecca and Medina, right? So when the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, says these things about your neighbor, it's obviously universal. Okay, I was making a point here and I got a little bit distracted. Okay, so the question is, these people are claiming, see, what they all say is, well, I'm interpreting the Quran one way and you're interpreting it another way. The challenge is the interpretation that says you got to go and kill innocent people. My question will be, well, do you realize the Quran also says if you kill an innocent person, it's like killing all of humanity? Do you realize the Quran also says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق. For those who kill innocent or good men and good women and then never repent, for them is the punishment of a fire, and a terrible punishment it is, right? And obviously, if you're killing a random selection of people, you're going to kill innocent people and good people, right? So the point I'm making here is their interpretation necessitates that you believe that the Quran contradicts itself left, right, and center. So if you ask these people who pull out these 5 verses, right? If you follow those 5 verses and you don't follow the rest of the Quran, or if you follow those 5 verses, or you look at those 5 verses and you say, hang on, this looks like it contradicts itself. You're saying kill them wherever you find them, but if you kill an innocent person, you go to hell, right? How is this a contradiction? Now, their interpretation is, yes, it's a contradiction because it's a made-up religion and it's not the word of God. But no logical person, and definitely no Muslim in the world, can therefore follow that interpretation. Why? Because the Quran itself, and this is all explained in the book, but the Quran itself makes it crystal clear that this is a book within which you will find no contradiction. So if your interpretation of the Quran is a self-contradicting one, it is automatically absolutely incorrect. And if it's not, show me the contradiction. And because the bottom line is, if the Quran contradicts itself, nobody should believe in it by the Quran's own admission, right? So the idea here is that if their interpretation necessitates that the Quran contradicts itself, then no sensible person could follow it, including every Muslim would just be like, oh, hang on, this is a self-contradicting book, I'm not going to follow it anymore. But if you take the whole text of the Quran, then it becomes very obvious that those verses have a particular context. And when seen in context, it doesn't contradict itself at all, ever. So I might have explained that kind of the long roundabout way. I'm sure there was a more concise way of me saying this, but a general principle. If you're not Muslim, you're starting to explore Islam, you're starting to explore the Quran, a general principle you can use is, hang on, if this seems like it's contradicting itself, I must have missed something. Or this is totally made up and it's not a truly divine book, right? But obviously, the mainstream, not even the mainstream, like the Muslim perspective on the Quran across the board is it never contradicts itself. If it did, then it couldn't be the word of God, right? God, like if there are any lies in it, if there are any untruths in it, it couldn't be the word of God. So I hope that was clear.
Yeah. Thanks.
Does that make sense to you, Adee?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's very good. You explained it very well. And, this is, I think, it's one of the hardest hurdles for those that are thinking about Islam. It's one of the hardest hurdles to get over.
Yeah.
Yeah, this stereotyping and so forth.
Yeah, it's the stereotyping, it's fear-mongering. You got to realize, like, if what those people are saying about Islam is true, it's like, I kind of want to play a game with them and say, look, like, okay, Mr. Islam hater, you think you're an expert on Islam. Okay, cool. Tell me how I should follow my religion. Be my sheikh for a minute. Tell me how I should follow my religion, right? What do you think I should do? Am I meant to kill you because you're not Muslim, right? Am I going to go around killing the people around me? And if they say yes, I'll be like, okay, cool. But what about the verse of the Quran that says if you kill an innocent person, it's like killing all of humanity? Should I go and kill all of humanity? Immediately there'll be so many contradictions. Now, any sensible person cannot follow a self-contradicting path, right? It doesn't make sense. You could but they have no answer to that. They have no answer to it. Their answer is, well, this religion just contradicts itself. Well, no, it doesn't. Like, as a Muslim, I couldn't possibly believe that. If I did believe that, I would have to leave the religion, right? Or leave my intelligence. But again, the Quran all the way through is reaffirming, use your mind, think for yourself, reflect on what's being said. So, I found that very, it's just a concise way to overstep or sidestep the nonsense that's thrown at the religion. It's like, well, they've got a misunderstanding if they think it contradicts itself.
Yeah, this was one of the main reasons why I started thinking about Islam. So it was like just after 9/11, which was 20 years ago, and it didn't make sense to me. And I was listening to all of these things on the news and everything that people were saying, and it didn't make sense. And I started to stick up for the Muslims, and that's when I started thinking about Islam.
Beautiful.
Okay, so let's move on to the next point here that I'm taking from.
Oh man, that was
the Amazon.
The first little sentence, and I spoke for like 20 minutes. Sorry about that. Okay.
That's fine, because it's very important. This is a very important thing, and if people can get over this hurdle, it's they've done half the job, I reckon, because then they can start working on the next part, which is the most interesting part. And I'll just read it from the Amazon .com description. It says, in his profound yet highly accessible book, Practicing Muslim, Mamoon Yusaf provides a vital introduction to the essential teachings of Islam. Okay, so what are the essential teachings of Islam and the introduction?
The essential teaching of Islam is La ilaha. There is no God. Illallah. Only Allah. And the La ilaha part removes I often say, like, the God that the atheist doesn't believe in, I don't believe in that God either. The atheist typically is is putting forward arguments for the non-existence of gods that don't exist. And what do I mean by that? Gods that exist within time, space, and matter. Gods that exist within time, space, and matter. In other words, a magic man who lives in the sky on a cloud with a beard and shoots down thunderbolts. That's what we would call an ilah. That's a deity, a false god. We can sometimes use it as a god with a little g rather than the real God with a capital G. But actually throughout the book, I may sometimes use the word God, but I typically use the word Allah to create a distinction between what people think of as gods, like with a little g and in plural, like deities or things that are false objects of worship that could exist within time, space, and matter, versus the infinite intelligence behind the universe, before and behind the universe, right? And what do we know about this infinite? And this is the essential teaching. It goes a little bit into conversations about atheism and monotheism. Is it okay with you if we go there real quick?
That's fine. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So here's the way I see it, and we see it, right? In fact, I'll tell you something, right? Ricky Gervais. Have you heard of Ricky Gervais, stand-up comedian? The guy who founded The Office. So this guy, an enthusiastic atheist, and he was being interviewed by Stephen Colbert recently, and Stephen Colbert kind of challenged him on atheism, and he asked the question, and I think Stephen Colbert is a Catholic, right? So he asked the question to Ricky Gervais. He said, "How could something come from nothing? How could something come from nothing?" I was like, well, good question. That is the essential problem that every atheist has to face, right? How could something possibly come from nothing? And Ricky Gervais kind of talked around it a little bit, and he said, look, well, I'm an atheist. Look, what he said was something to the effect of, why am I an atheist? Because you say God exists. I say, can you prove it? You say no. And I say, well, I don't believe you then, right? So there's a couple of essential claims. One is the atheist, the kind of new atheist, not the deep atheists, okay? And the ones who are extremely well philosophically rounded. But the modern kind of new atheist, or the postmodern new atheist, kind of says, well, you believe in God and I don't believe in God. And I would say, no, that's not true. That's a sneaky way of getting out of it. It's not that I believe in God and you don't believe in God. It's that I believe God exists and you believe God does not exist. We both have a belief system. We're both staking a claim. Now, the atheist always wants to put the burden of proof on the one who believes God exists, which would make sense if we were talking about an ilah, if we were talking about a mystical being that exists within time, space, and matter, a magical someone living on a cloud somewhere who's all powerful, right? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about that whose non-existence is inconceivable, right? So there are two really, like the Islamic frame or understanding of God's existence. There are two pretty rock solid kind of arguments for it, okay? The first is acknowledging the three categories of existence, and that typically takes people a little bit of time to wrap their heads around. So we may come back to that, but that's actually described at the beginning of the book about denial and self-destruction. Okay, so if you read that chapter, at the beginning of it, it kind of goes briefly into the argument of the three categories of existence. But we'll put that one aside for a sec. The other one is much more simple, and it simply states, and here's the thing, both of these arguments, I did A-level, which is kind of like just before university level, philosophy and religion when I was at school, right? Or when I was at college, let's say. And I never heard either of these arguments, right? So we went through all the arguments for and against the existence of God, but I never heard either of these, at least not framed this way. So this argument was put forward by Al-Ghazali famously, and St. Thomas Aquinas kind of, I don't want to say ripped it off, but he kind of uses a similar argument, but it's not as powerful when St. Thomas Aquinas uses it. And I'll explain why. You might have heard of the argument of causality, right? Well, here's how Al-Ghazali puts it. He says, look, everything that has a beginning has a cause. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. Okay? Everything that has a beginning has a cause. So there's the table in front of me. This has a beginning. Well, no, you know what? There's another step. Everything that exists within time has a beginning. And everything that has a beginning has a cause. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Everything that exists within time has a beginning. And everything that has a beginning has a cause. What do we mean by exists within time? Well, basically, everything around you, including you, exists within time, right? Everything within the universe exists within time, okay? And everything that exists within time has a beginning. So this table, me, you, we have a beginning. Like physically, we have a beginning. So everything that exists within time has a beginning, and everything that has a beginning has a cause. Now, most people follow the argument to this point, yeah, absolutely. And then you say, well, the universe exists within time, therefore the universe has a beginning. Now, a few hundred years ago, people really fought that idea that the universe has a beginning. Like, how do you know the universe isn't infinite? Well, now, scientifically speaking, it kind of, the most recent science really points towards the idea that, yeah, the universe probably does have a beginning, as in the Big Bang Theory, right? So people don't really fight that much anymore on the idea that the universe has a beginning, but Al-Ghazali puts forward a series of excellent arguments to demonstrate that it must have a beginning. However, we won't get into that now. We'll just say the universe exists within time, therefore it must have a beginning. Most people accept this, okay? Well, then you say, okay, well, if it has a beginning, it must have a first cause, right? So there must be something before the universe that caused it. Now, the atheist says, well, then, okay. So the atheist might say, but maybe that thing must also have a beginning and have a cause. Maybe that thing also has a cause. Maybe that thing also has a cause. And we say, yeah, okay, but that means there must have at some point, it's what we call infinite regression, right? Well, if the universe had a cause, and whatever caused it must have a cause, and whatever caused that must have a cause, whatever caused that must have a cause. And that's what we end up with infinite regression, which is kind of nonsensical. There must have, if you go back however many steps, been something with no beginning, right? That exists outside of time. Everything within time has a beginning, and everything that has a beginning has a cause. There must therefore be something with no beginning that exists outside of time that caused the universe as we know it, right? So this is the most basic argument. It's what we call a rational argument. So it doesn't depend on revelation. It doesn't depend on science, right? Because even the idea that the universe has a beginning can be philosophically demonstrated through logic. Now, that thing with no beginning, that's the first what we call essential attribute of God, is that it has no beginning. The other essential attribute is existence, right? Which you get through the understanding of the three categories of existence. Now, that thing that doesn't exist within time, space, and matter, and that has no beginning, that's the God, that's Allah. That's the thing that I'm saying. Now, going back to the conversation with Stephen Colbert and Ricky Gervais, you can't put proof of the existence of God on me now if you have no response to, well, everything that has a beginning has a cause, the universe has a beginning, therefore it must have a cause. Like, now you can't say, oh no, you have to prove to me that this thing exists, because it's like, well, no, now you kind of have to prove that this thing doesn't exist. The other really simple one is, look, let's just assume for a minute everything happened randomly. The first cell, in order to exist on planet Earth, this is an argument I first read by somebody called Dr. Maurice Bucaille, who wasn't Muslim, but then with some of the arguments some of these kinds of arguments, he started to believe in Islam. He said, look, the first cell, in order for it to come about by random chance, so we're not talking about all of life on Earth or all of life in the universe. We're talking about just the very first cell on planet Earth. For it to come about by random chance, what are the odds of that happening? Right? What are the odds of that happening? And people really don't have the order of magnitude, because the first cell, it can't be partially formed. It has to be fully formed in order to be able to replicate and then expand and then become life on the planet, right? This is from a purely evolutionary point of view. Well, the first cell, in the chance of the first cell coming about by complete randomness isn't 1 in a billion. It isn't 1 in a trillion. It's 1 in 1 0 0 0 0 0 0. So that would be a million, right? 0 0 0. That would be a billion. 0 0 0. That would be 1,000 billion, which I think might be a trillion. 0 0 0. I'm sure that's a trillion, right? 0, 0, 0. There's no word for this number now. 950 zeros. The order of magnitude of that randomness just for the first cell is nonsensical. If you were to say, what are the odds of that happening? And you were to round it up, you would just say 0. That is basically impossible, right? 1 over 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 with 950 zeros. Dr. Maurice Bucaille in his book, I've forgotten the name of the book. He's written a couple of really good ones, but they're all to do with science and philosophy and that kind of thing. The philosophy of science and the existence of God. But he says, look, if you were to throw iron into a volcano, it's like the chance of throwing iron into a volcano and the Eiffel Tower coming out, right? And now you're going to tell me that the onus is on me to prove that this thing exists, the thing that caused it? Like, the odds that atheists are right are that little, that first cell came about absolutely randomly. And then not to mention all of the rest of life and all the universe. So yeah, there's a really good book you can read if you want this is a book that anybody who becomes Muslim and anybody who is Muslim, really, it's one of the masterpieces of all of Islamic literature and all the entire genre of works on Islam, and it's called Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam al-Ghazali, right? The Revival of Religious Sciences by Imam al-Ghazali. What this book does, and you know what? I'm going to go back to answering your actual original question, which what are the essential teachings of Islam? Because right now we're just on La ilaha illallah, which is the essential one. There's no God, only Allah, which is this being that exists outside of time, space, and matter. There are other essential qualities of this being that can be logically deduced, including no beginning, no end, existence, will. Knowledge, because obviously if it exists before the universe and then created the universe, it's got to have power, it's got to have knowledge, and it's got to have will, because it existed. The universe came into existence because the universe exists within time. It had to come into existence at some point. Well, why did it come into existence at that point of time rather than before, earlier or later? Right? There must be some kind of decision making or will that decided that, okay, now the universe will come into existence. So if something has knowledge and if something has power and will and knowledge, then it must also have life. Because there's this thing of, like some people say, well, I kind of believe that there's some kind of thing, intelligence before the universe. Well, let's just expand on that a little bit. If it has no beginning and no end, it has knowledge, it has power, and it has will, it must also have life. Well, now there's a living being that is outside, but that is laysa kamithlihi shay, as the Quran says, unlike anything you know. Like, there is nothing like unto it. And that's the thing that we're calling Allah. And that's the thing that, now I'm sorry, but the atheist has to change their tune if they're claiming that the burden of proof is on us. No, the burden of proof is on the atheist to prove their belief that when they say, I believe God does not exist. It's like, well, now it doesn't make so much sense anymore. With those three reasons. The first cell which is just an example of the randomness of the infinitesimally small chance of this randomness happening without being divinely guided. The second thing is everything that has a beginning has an initial cause. And the third thing is the argument of the three categories of existence. And I'll say this one really briefly. Okay. All of this, again, these read The Revival of the Religious Sciences, because what Al-Ghazali does in this book is he says, look, there's three dimensions, as we know from a famous prophetic saying, which is introduced at the beginning of the book, Inside the Soul of Islam. There are three dimensions to any religion. There's the dimension of beliefs, which is what I've been talking about so far, which actually isn't the focus of the book Inside the Soul of Islam. It's just briefly mentioned. Then there's the dimension of practice, right? Like in every religion, there are practices. There is food that you eat and don't eat. There are marriage rites and funeral rites. There are ways of praying and fasting and things like that. Okay, there are the practices. So it's what we call iman, or the belief system leads to faith, which is iman. The practices is the rubric or the dimension of Islam, which is what we call the outward practices. And then there's the third dimension, which is the dimension of ihsan, which is what we would call spirituality or spiritual excellence. And this is what most of the book Inside the Soul of Islam is about. Why? Because this is the dimension that can bring benefit to everyone, even if they don't believe in the belief system, and even if they don't do the practices. The spiritual dimension affects us all, and it's why the book that I wrote can have a transformative effect on anyone who reads it. We don't go too much into that. It's one of the reasons why I'm explaining the logical belief system right now. The book doesn't talk about that too much. It talks more about the spiritual dimension, because when you get that, when someone tastes the sweetness of the honey, which is the spiritual depth of Islam, my gosh, you want to keep going. You want to go deeper and deeper into it. And pretty soon, unfortunately, I think a lot of Westerners have this challenge where it seems as though their belief system might contradict their spirituality. Or I want to be spiritual and believe in something, but the dominant or the predominant postmodern view is that God doesn't really exist. It's kind of just a fairy tale. We don't really know. At the most, you should be agnostic, right? And say that we can't know whether or not God exists, which is another belief system. But what Islam does really brilliantly is it fuses, and it says, well, in order to really have faith, you've got to really have a deep understanding of God. And in order to really have faith, you've got to use your intellect. And the more you use your intellect and develop a deeper understanding of God, the more beautifully that aligns with your spiritual practices. And the more you do your spiritual practices and have this firm belief system, the more you'll go deeper and deeper into the immersive, beautiful, delicious spiritual depths of Islam. And the spiritual depth is where I spend most of my focus, because after you know the belief system, which basically you can read in a book and it'll take you maybe half an hour, right, to read everything about the belief system. After that, you've got the physical practices, but what gives the physical practices depth and is backed up by the belief system is the spirituality of the religion, right? Hay House typically publishes books that are spiritual, not religious. And they went out on a limb by publishing a book that was my book, which is spiritual and deeply religious. And I think that there's, if people knew how profoundly the logic and the belief system of Islam intertwines with the physical practices and intertwines with the spirituality of it, which is the thesis really of the revival of the religious sciences of Imam al-Ghazali, right? That's essentially what he does, is he covers every aspect of the religion. Book 1 is the book of knowledge, and book 2 is the book of the foundations of belief, which is most of what I've been sharing with you is based on that book. And these are the first 2 volumes of a 40-volume work. But that gives everyone, even if you're not Muslim, but you're open to reading something of real substance. And he was a master philosopher. They say that the reason that the world is, let's just say that Al-Ghazali and Averroes, between them, they really changed the Western world in terms of understanding of philosophy. But anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, and I'm just looking at the time here as well. I'm like, okay, you've only asked me a couple. We're like 2 sentences into the description of the book, and we've got to La ilaha illallah. We haven't even talked about Muhammadan Rasulullah, right? Muhammad is the messenger of God. But yeah, these are the essential teachings. I'll give you one more frame of the essential teachings, which is this. I was watching a chat show, and this is an anecdote I tell at the beginning of the book. Right, I was watching a chat show, and it was mainly liberals, so-called liberals, who were talking. All of them were talking about Islam, and of course, there wasn't a Muslim there. And one of the characters, one of the chat show people on the chat show said, "Well, Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas." Islam is the motherload of bad ideas, right? Because somebody, like, it was actually Ben Affleck said, hey, you're being really Islamophobic. What about all the good Muslims in the world? And the other gentleman said, well, look, Islam is the motherload of bad ideas. And I don't think it's good to follow bad ideas. And when I first heard that, I was like, what bad ideas? Truth? Is that a bad idea? Love? Compassion? Forgiveness? Peace? Presence? Wisdom? Like, which of these are bad ideas? Because these are the words. Consciousness? These are words that you will find on every single page of the Quran, right? These are words that are these are actually in their absolute form. They're names of God, like that we learn from revelation. There are some things about God that we can learn through rationality, which I shared some of that with you. There are some things that we then learn from revelation. And in the Quran, Allah talks of himself as being Al-Haq, the truth, and Al-Wadud, the loving, and Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the most loving, the most benevolent. So these are the essential teachings. Actually what the book does is in part 2 of the book, it goes through each of these values: truth, love, peace, forgiveness, presence, wisdom, and then a few of the, so these are the virtues, and then a few of the vices, like arrogance and judgmentalism and things like that. So it goes into them and then explores a psychological approach to understanding them in a way that becomes spiritually transformative, hopefully for all of the readers. Okay, I've been talking a lot. Let me just check in that we're still
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm really enjoying everything that you're saying. So all of the references and books that you mentioned, if anyone wants to check, I'll put them into the show notes, and then you
that'd be wonderful.
Check them up from there.
Excellent.
Okay, so there was, we started to touch on spirituality and spiritual evolution there. I just had one question that came to my mind was, for all those people out there that have not experienced Islamic spirituality yet, how could what's the difference between Christian spirituality and Buddhist spirituality and any of the other ones? What is the thing that's unique about the Islamic spirituality?
Oh, what a beautiful question. Well, I want to answer this in 2 ways. A surface level way and a deep dive way. At a surface level, and when it comes to at a surface level, let me give an example that I think was given by the Dalai Lama, right? Which is, he says, look, there are many flavors. There are many different, if you go around the world, there are many different types and flavors of tea, right? And some of them are sweet, some of them are bitter. There are different herbs, different spices that can be put in tea. There are different kinds of tea. There's green tea, there's black tea, and these days there's hundreds of kinds of tea, right? That are all available in your local supermarket. But he says, the different spiritual paths are like different flavors of tea. You might like the taste of some more than others, but whichever tea you drink, the real spirituality is universal. It's the water that's in the tea. And today, billions of people really are dehydrated spiritually, and they just need the water. And on that level, I'm like, I am with anyone pursuing a spiritual path, whatever path they're following, right? Because they know, oh man, I'm kind of, the minute you don't know how thirsty you are until you have a sip of water. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I need more of this, right? And so one way of looking at it, and this is what I would say is kind of the surface level way, is any spirituality, any teaching that can help you be more conscious of the divine presence. And all teachings on presence make you more conscious of the divine presence, because God is unimaginable. The closest you come to being aware of God's presence is to have a quiet mind, right? And with a quiet mind, that's where insight comes. That's where wisdom comes. And this is really a teaching that's in many religions, and of course in the spiritual teachings of Islam. So that's on a surface level. We're all dehydrated, and we all need the hydration wherever you can get it from. Like the wisdom is the lost treasure of the believer. seek it from wherever it can be found, right? So there's that, which is, hey, if it's universal spirituality, if there's any depth to it, if it hydrates you, drink it, okay, while we're dying of dehydration. However, and that kind of leads a lot to the kind of, I'm spiritual, not religious kind of trend, which is becoming increasingly popular. But I think that there's a couple of reasons. Okay, before I say why that's becoming increasingly popular, I've got to call something out. Whilst it's true that hydration may be available anywhere, it's also true that if you ask any master from any tradition, there are many, many things in the depths of the spiritual tradition that they're following, whether it's the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh or people from, like, I'm picking on Buddhists today, right? Or people from any kind of religion in the world, right? While it's true that there's basic spirituality and it's hydration and everybody needs it, right? It's not good enough to think of yourself as being a good person and therefore you'll be okay and you'll go to heaven and live happily ever after. It's like, no, hydrate yourself spiritually. But if you ask any of the masters of any of those spiritual traditions, they know for certain there is incredible depths of spirituality that the average person doesn't get to. And if you want to go to those incredible depths of spirituality, it's like digging a well. If you dig in 10 different places, right? If you just read popular mainstream books on religion and, dig a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here and a little bit there, you may never reach water, right? And again, because of the mercy and love and benevolence of God, you'll still get some little bit of hydration. Like you can read a book from the Kabbalah, and you can read a book from the Zen Buddhism, and you can read a book on Sufism, and you can read a book on Christian spirituality, and you'll get some hydration along the way. But then it's like trying to dig a well of water and digging in 10 different places. But if you find one spot and you keep digging and you keep digging and you go 10 times deeper in one spot, then you'll hit water, and then there'll be a never-ending fountain. And then you'll be more than just hydrated with delicious tea. You'll be hydrated with delicious tea that really transforms you in a way that having a little bit of presence here and there and a little bit of self-awareness here and there, it's not the same, right? And if you ever meet one of these masters, you can instantly tell by looking at them that they have a different kind of presence to the average person, right? They're taking their spiritual practice extremely seriously. They're not just flirting around with it, right? And then you say, okay, well, then what's unique about the Islamic approach? Well, I would say a couple of things are unique. One is that there is all of the spiritual depth that there is to be had, and it depends how deep you want to go here, but okay, there's all of the spiritual depth that there is to be had. Number one. Number two, there is a belief system that is absolutely brilliantly logical to back it up. So you never fall into things like logical or philosophical impossibilities, like anthropomorphism or believing that God is in everything, but those things are contingent, which means that makes God contingent, right? And by the way, so that's one thing. There's this brilliant mindset, or I guess it's called the mind of Islam. If there's inside the soul of Islam, there's also the mind of Islam, which is the belief system. And that brilliantly backs it up to the point where it kind of puts your heart at rest. Like you're not doing something crazy or ungrounded or illogical by believing in God. It's quite the opposite. It's very logical and very grounded. And then you've got the spiritual depth of it. And then I think the third thing that a lot of other, that's kind of unique to Islam is there's no distinction between lay people and let's say, basically there's an even playing field. You can go as deep as you want to go with the spiritual practices. You can go as deep as you want to go with your depth of knowledge, right? There's no hierarchy. There is a hierarchy, but it's based on credit. It's not based on politics. It's not based on randomly assigned status. The only hierarchy is based on actual knowledge, right? So if someone appears to be very knowledgeable and then they say something which is very unknowledgeable, or they put forward a very false argument, all of a sudden it's based. How am I saying? What am I trying to say here? It's based on authentic credibility, right? So yeah, there are popular speakers and preachers and things like that, but it's kind of every individual has the absolute ability to get close to God by themselves through following the spiritual teachings that the religion gives, versus having to go through an intermediary. So I think it's the combination. It's the belief system and the deep spirituality and the beautiful practices all combined together to just be something that's it's just a very powerful combination. It's one of the reasons why Muslims, for example, you might have noticed, generally speaking, are very accepting of death, for example. Why? Well, because the beliefs of the afterlife are so explicitly clear in the Quran and in the Sunnah, in the Quran and in the teachings of the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, that we know we're going to die, and we're absolutely, the whole point of life is preparing yourself to the moment you do die and meet your Maker. So there's not this this very common theme that's that I've noticed in other cultures and other people of other belief systems, where it's like, how could God take such an innocent life and die? It's like, that doesn't make sense. If anything, that reinforces the belief of a Muslim, because the Quran says, we will surely test you through loss of life and wealth, but blessed are those, but the mercy and blessings and love and forgiveness descend upon those who say, from God we come, to God we return. So that's something that I think is unique. Now, the thing is, it's hard to say what's unique, because I'm not an expert in every religion, right? I'm not an expert in every tradition. So I'm saying what I perceive to be unique, and what I know to be very powerful and true, and I think there's also something about the logic of there being an infinitely loving, infinitely merciful, infinitely forgiving God, like Allah, who's the only one who judges you. That does something wonderful. It's like there is an objective morality, but it must be taken out of the hands of people. Because if morality is left in the hands of people, it will very quickly become subjective, right? And you can't actually logically work out objective morality. This is one of the reasons why subjective morality is so popular these days, right? But you can't necessarily work out objective morality, but the religion of Islam offers it and repeatedly gives it back to God, right? So it's like, there are rules, like Muslims pray 5 times a day. Technically, if you miss a prayer, it's fard, which means it's an essential spiritual practice, and if you miss it, it's considered sinful. Like, you fast during Ramadan, and if there are certain reasons why you don't fast, like if you're ill or sick or pregnant or anything like that. But if you're healthy and you're sound mind and you don't fall into any of those other categories, then you fast. And if you don't, it's sinful. And yet that is then handed back to God. So, and yet God is the most forgiving, and God is the most benevolent, and God is the most loving. And so justice will ultimately be done, and it will be done in the most loving, forgiving, kind possible way. So there's something about all of these factors coming together that just is like, this is a wonderful package. This is great. So I feel very, very blessed to have been put in a position whereby I can access this religion, and whereby a position where I realize the truth of the Quran and the truth of the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. I feel very, very blessed to be here. Anyone who decides to explore it, I think every moment of that exploration is blessed. There's a beautiful saying we have where the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said that God says, So it's not a Quran. It's what we call a hadith Qudsi, a sacred prophetic saying. But God says, if my servant remembers me, I remember my servant. And if my servant remembers me inside of himself, I remember him in my innermost self. And if my servant remembers me in a gathering, I remember my servant in an even greater gathering. And if my servant comes near to me by an inch, I come miles closer to him. If he comes to me by a handspan, I come an arm's length towards him. If he comes to me by a yard, I come to him miles. If my servant comes to me walking, I go to him running. So this whole exploration, even just listening to this podcast to explore this spiritual path, it's immediately blessed. And we say that Allah is closer to you than your carotid artery, right? So closer to you than the most innermost part of your physical being, because Allah is closer to you than physicality. And any step, that the reason that Al-Ghazali's 40-volume work starts with the Book of Knowledge is because, and it ends actually with the Book of Death, is because knowledge is the starting point, and it takes you all the way from the cradle to the grave. And that's another maybe unique thing about Islam, is it's extremely thoroughly grounded on knowledge. There's a huge emphasis on knowledge, not because external knowledge will get you there, but because the depths of internal spiritual knowledge are kind of guarded by this external knowledge. So like the arguments for the existence of God, that's not spirituality, but it guards your spirituality. It guards your deep connection with God, where you don't have to doubt whether or not God exists, and yet simultaneously have or taste this deep spiritual connection. So that's some thoughts. That's a very good question, honestly.
Yeah, thanks for answering that, Mamoon. Really inspirational. And I just want to, if anyone out there has actually managed to listen to this whole episode, just take a quick check now where your mind is. And do you feel like all your problems are gone just by thinking about Allah and contemplating, the purpose of life? Just think about it for one moment, because I know myself, I feel all my problems just left me for 1 hour.
Allahu Akbar. There's an understanding in the Quran, and this is something we go quite deep into in the book. And really, this is maybe the most unique dimension of Islamic spirituality. There's an understanding that the Quran says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Ala bi dhikrillahi mutma'innal qulub." Is it not through bringing Allah to mind that the hearts find tranquility and peace? And by quietening the mind and by being aware of God and talking about God, the reason there is this quietude that overtakes us, as you just beautifully described. And that quiet space is where insight occurs. That quiet space is where the aha moments and the breakthroughs and all of the good stuff happens. And of course, as you read the Quran, as you listen to conversations like these, we're talking about God the whole time, really, right? And that brings a tranquility that is beyond time, space, and matter. It's they say, don't search for God, quiet your mind, and you'll find the part of you that has always been deeply, deeply connected with God. It's what we call your fitrah, or your natural disposition. Your innermost soul has always been connected, but the loud, chattering mind distracts you. Quiet it down, and we're instantly connected.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mamoon. So I'm going to put into the show notes a link to your free 45-minute web class, okay? Because if anyone's interested in connecting with you and they want to use you as a coach, and it's probably a good idea for anyone out there who's thinking about learning about Islam to use Mamoon as a coach. So if they go through that 45-minute free a web session, then
Mm-hmm.
what's the next step after that? How does the coaching happen?
Great question. That's actually kind of explained in the web class. There are different courses and things like that you can take. And the first step is really checking out the web class to see if what it will do is it'll reinforce some of the things that you might read about in the book Inside the Soul of Islam, but the kind of the psychological dimension, which we didn't really talk about today, but that'll be reinforced in the web class. And then you'll be invited to join my coaching programs.
Okay, great. Is there anything else you want to say about the services you offer?
Not really. I'm an open book. Feel free, to contact me anytime if you want to do a deeper dive or an exploration into any of this stuff. In terms of coaching services, there's a lot on offer, and it might be a bit overwhelming if I say everything that's going on. So probably the simplest thing is just to go to quranforbusypeople.com/shift, watch the Paradigm Shift web class, and that will hopefully be mind-opening or eye-opening for you. And I'd also recommend if the topic of this web class, honestly, if you listen to this podcast, you probably ought to read Inside the Soul of Islam. That's where we do a deep dive into the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think this is essential. If anyone's serious about pursuing Islam, you can do it the hard way, which is trying to figure it all out by yourself, going to this website and reading this book and doing all of this business. And it will take you, a few years or whatever. But if you use a guide, someone who you trust, someone who, listen to them, see what they're talking about, make sure you trust what they say and follow that person, it's going to make the distance and the travel time a lot less. And it's going to make it a lot easier because they're going to tell you, all of the places where you could, have a problem or fall over. So, this is my advice to you out there. If you want to take it serious, find someone who can be a mentor and use that mentor. And as Mamoon said earlier, you can dig deeper and deeper in just one spot and hopefully get to the water quicker, and this is the whole thing. We don't want to waste time. You need to be serious about it.
Yeah. Well said.
Okay, Mamoon. So we're gonna wrap it up here. Could you just give a quick conclusion advice to our listeners out there about what they should do about going forward now and in converting to Islam, and what are some tips and action points that they should take from now?
Well, I like what you just said about a mentor and a guide. It's important to know that there are people that the Prophet, peace. I'll leave you with this. The Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, said that the prophets do not leave behind as inheritance like dinar or dirham, gold coins or money or anything like that, but rather their inheritance is knowledge. And then he said, Al-ulama warathatul anbiya. The true scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. And a true scholar is more than someone with external knowledge. It's also someone with internal depth, with a deep spiritual connection to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, and a deep spiritual connection thereby to God. And there are telltale signs that someone is a preacher versus a true inheritor. Honestly, I'm a preacher. There may be a slight distinction is I won't say anything that goes against what the true inheritors, the true scholars teach, right? So if, for example, I could list 10 or 20 scholars off the top of my head, and if they said something about Islam and I said the opposite, I tell you right now, listen to them, not me, right? They're my teachers. And eventually, if you're very, very lucky, at some point in your journey, you'll meet one, like a sage who can guide you through the journey. But when I mention telltale signs, this person won't be angry or agitated or have a political agenda or any of that. There won't be this kind of negative energy from them. the first thing you'll notice is a serenity and a peace and a happiness that is, and a presence that is, that takes you aback, regardless of where they're from. They could be from the deepest part of an African desert, or they could be from the center of a metropolitan city. But regardless of where they're from, they'll have something that you can tell is unique. And it will be absolutely aligned and backed up and, like I said, guarded with knowledge. So the spiritual depth will be guarded with knowledge. So they won't be saying things that are against the main teachings of Islam. The minute you find somebody who's saying something against the mainstream teachings of Islam, it's like, yeah, that's a charlatan, right? They'll never, yeah. So what I would say is, as you go on the journey, yeah, you'll find a lot of Muslims who will kind of point you in the right direction, for sure. Adee is one of them. I hope to be one of them. And ultimately, they'll also point you in the direction of the true people who are grounded in knowledge. Let me see if there's one final thing here. You can ask God directly. If you know God exists, or if you have an inkling that there's this universal power behind the universe, you have an inkling that it's real and it's true, and wouldn't it be benevolent of this living being that created all that is to give you revelation, like a piece of guidance that's divine and beyond time, space, and matter that can guide you? It would be very rational and logical for that to happen. That's why we believe in all of the prophets from all times. Ask God to guide me to the one who will guide me to you. Guide me to the one who will guide me to you. Guide me to the path that will guide me to you. Islam, some people say Islam means peace. Islam isn't peace. As-salam is peace, and that's Allah's name. So Islam is derived from the word salam, the most absolute form of which is as-salam. So when Muslims say as-salam alaikum, we're saying peace be with you, but that's peace with a capital P. It really means God be with you, okay? The secret is Islam isn't peace. Islam is the path to peace. So the big journey isn't becoming Muslim. Becoming Muslim is like stepping into the first day of university. You don't graduate on the day that you register. That's the beginning of the journey. And then you're on a path that from all angles leads you directly towards as-salam, true ultimate peace, which is God, Allah. So I would say that's my final advice. Ask God directly. Guide me to the one who will guide me to you. Guide me to the path that will guide me to you. And I ask this for myself and for you. May Allah love you and guide you and protect you. Ask God by the name Ya Hadi, Ya Wadud, O guide, O most loving. And by those names you can ask him to guide you. Ya Hadi, Ya Wadud, guide me. O guide, O most loving, guide me. And you can ask him to guide me to the path that will guide me to you. Guide me to the one who will guide me to you. And that by doing that, you'll find a true inheritor of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him. And when you meet a true inheritor, you'll have no doubt in your mind. You'll just know, okay, this person is definitely connected with God, definitely through the Prophet Muhammad, definitely knows stuff that can get me. Because what happens is, by having a true mentor or guide who's really spiritually connected, you, just as Adee said, you leap forward years of exploration and years of self-study and years of doing it the hard way. You get there light years faster. And the way to get there is just to ask God directly. The one who's trying to learn about God and who's trying to get close to God, and it's just so easy, just at any point. And the best times to do this are just before sunrise and before sunset. Just, get on your knees, hold your hands up and ask God, the guide, the most loving guide, the most generous and wise, guide me to the one who will guide me to you, and guide me to the path that will guide me to you. If anything I've said has been of any benefit, then it came to you from Allah. And anything that I've said that is false or incorrect or a misunderstanding on my part is absolutely from my own ego and from the evil forces that exist. And may Allah protect you from them and protect you from anything negative inside of me and guide you absolutely in the most easy, abundant way directly into the deepest knowledge and connection with him, with Allah.
Yeah, thanks for that advice, Mamoon. That's excellent advice, and that's really the crux of it, isn't it? Is just the final matter is just to ask God, ask Allah. You know,
absolutely.
That's the final thing. That's it all comes down to this, and God will not leave you in the lurch. So
yeah.
Alhamdulillah, thanks so much for coming onto the show, Mamoon. I really appreciate it.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, you really got me in my groove today. You got me in the flow of really you're asking me about my favorite topics. So I could talk all day about things, and I kind of did. So apologies if I kind of over rambled on some of these things. I think we got 2 sentences into the description of the book here, but
that's right. Yeah, but we covered most of it. There's not much that they left. I'll try to put the whole description into the show notes. And also, if all the links are there if anyone wants to get at Mamoon, you can just follow those links to him. And hopefully in the future, Mamoon will come back onto the show for another episode.
I would be honored. May the peace, love, and blessings of Allah be with you always.
Amen. And same to you. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you and onto all of our listeners. Assalamu alaikum.